Hey everyone, George here, and it seems like these time-lapse videos are more favorable to everyone who watches, so it's a time-lapse now of Toejam and Earl. What you're seeing right now is me finishing up the work on the ship piece sign. The idea here is that I am using the emissive quality of the material. I'm going to have two materials, one for one set of light bulbs, one for another. I've got emission on, which is white, emission off, which is black, and I'm going to create a coroutine that's going to get started at the beginning of it. That's simply going to flash back and forth between emissive white on one set and black on the other set, back and forth by setting the color. Nothing terribly complicated here, pretty simple. Now, it doesn't quite work at first. I'm not exactly sure why it wasn't working. I think I just had some weird settings. So after a few changes, making sure there's a wait time between each one, I go back in and fix it. And you can see here that I'm kind of testing back and forth. You can see it swapping back and forth, but it's still not quite working. And I think that's because I had one set to black and one set to white, and it was not necessarily initializing things properly, so it wasn't working. But then you'll notice that as soon as I make a quick change to it, everything seems to be working just fine. And now we've got our lovely light show, so that pretty much from any location, you'll be able to see it. We don't really have any cool lighting set up yet, which is something I would like to have in the future, but I would really like it, or at least I will like it once I do it, to add maybe a point light source on top of this entire thing so that everything around it gets lit up as well when it's shining. I think having levels that are also maybe a little darker, a little bit more moody could be fun in some areas, and having this kind of brighten up the entire area would be a really great way of seeing it off in a distance and knowing you have to get to that point. It's kind of contrary to how the game is, because the game is about exploration, and you don't know where the ship piece is, and you kind of have to explore to find it. But in this way, I kind of like the idea that it's almost a maze to get to the object. You can see the object, you know it's there, but it's still not necessarily a A to B path. You've got to kind of figure your way out through the maze of pathways and so forth, and hidden locations. The next thing that I start working on are the presents themselves. I decide why not finish the graphics on them, or at least get something roughed out, make something look interesting. But I made a huge issue in the last video, and I mentioned it, and that was the fact that I had overridden my presents Maya file with the landscape one. So all I do here is I load in the FBX from the Unity exports back into Maya, make sure my units are set to meters so everything works right. And now I'm just going through and fixing them all. I made several mistakes. One of the mistakes was that my normals were inverted on the lower parts of the box, so I go ahead and delete them. For some reason, trying to invert them normally wasn't working, so I delete them, and then I just use the bridge tool to fix that. I'm also going to go through and fix a lot of the geometry. Here you can see me kind of tediously going through there and making sure that the geometry is not all pinched together. You could say I'm wasting my time, but I always feel like taking the time to make your geometry clean is always going to save you time in the long run, especially when you're early on in development and you might need to make a lot of tweaks. And it's just going to make a lot of the tools in Maya work more efficiently, especially when I have quads that I'm working with instead of triangles and so forth. So now I'm just grabbing the different elements. I'm starting to mess with UV unwrapping. I'm going to take the bottom, and I actually, each present I kind of take a different way of unwrapping as I figure out how it's working with Substance Painter. I'm going to do each one at a time. I bevel them as well to I've got plenty of polys in this scene right now to work with, or that is, I need more polys. I have plenty of just low-level detail, so why not throw some extra polys at these presents to make things look a little bit nicer? So that's kind of what I'm doing. With the UVs, the first present I do, I split each of the four sides up separately. That's something I'm going to get away from, and it has to do with the wrapping paper that I'm going to be creating. I want it to wrap around the present, and by introducing four seams, one in each corner, it makes wrapping a heck of a lot worse. Because if you use some of the different settings inside of Substance Painter, it's going to come at it from each angle. Now I'm looking up reference material to kind of remember what the different presents look like. There's no wrapping paper in Substance Source, so what I get an idea to do is I grab two different materials. One of them is just paper itself, a glossy paper for the top side, and that's going to be overriding all the roughness, and it's going to give it a little bit of kind of like normal and height information of just what wrapping paper should be. And then I bring in this really cool material called printed custom, skirt or shirt, excuse me, printed cotton shirt. This allows you to set a pattern. They've got many default ones which look great, which seem to come right out of the Toejam and Earl game. So I'm messing around with them right now. Of course, purple, green, of course, those are great colors to use for something like this. And you can see there's tons of different awesome patterns. I'm going to be using them for each of these presents so that I don't have to go into Photoshop and create my own patterns. I can just use this one. But that is a possibility for the future. I make it kind of generic looking. I'm not happy with this at all yet. I'm going to jump back into Maya and actually fix the next present once I export out these textures and fix all that stuff. And you'll see in a second. Now with this next present, it's a little bit more interesting, the shape of it. I've got these extrusions coming out. So I go ahead and, once again, round things out. I fix that inversion that I had a problem with, the normals right there, put the cap back on. And when I handle the UVs for this, it's very simple. I'm just going to take the top, rip it apart, center them up because the automatic stuff isn't doing a perfect job because of how sort of weird the shape is. And then I'm going to try to make each of those stripes a separate object. I'm going to cut this thing up into a lot of different pieces. Unlike the last one where it was only 4 pieces, each one of these is going to be separate. Now I forget when I jump into Substance Painter that I spent all this time and energy splitting this thing up and I end up using just one texture. But this could be a really nice thing to have stripes with in the future. And maybe I'll come back in now that I've remembered that I spent all this time on it reviewing this video, splitting up these UVs. But when we jump into a Substance Painter, you're going to see that I completely ignore it. All I'm doing now is I'm going to auto lay out everything, get it all in the same space, make it all look good. And I noticed some of the UVs aren't vertical, so I just fixed that real fast, just in case I got to do anything in Photoshop or whatnot. It's nice to have all my UVs in a common reference, so everything going vertically. So now we jump back into Substance Painter, and this is where I'm like, you know what? I don't like the fact that I can't delineate the top of the present from the bottom of the present. It doesn't have a good silhouette. If I'm seeing this present from far away, it's just going to be this kind of purple blob. So I decide that for every present, I'm going to have a different top and a bottom. And this way, I think it's going to register with your eyes a lot better. So that one was purple with the green. The primary top was purple. The green was a different one. I save that folder out as a smart material, and I'm going to bring that smart material into each one of these that I create. Here you can see I kind of throw away all that work I did. I'm not using the stripes at all. I should be applying a different material to them, making them more interesting, but instead I just, I waste it. I'm going to have to go back and then fix that now that I see it. But once again, with Toejam and Earl, I mean, I can pretty much get away with any kind of pattern that I want to, so long as it's crazy and colorful, and that's what you're seeing there. Back into Maya with the next present. We're just cleaning up those same problems that we had before, beveling those edges, cleaning up any geometry that looks nasty, and just, making it look a little bit nicer. Once again, here we are cleaning that stuff up, making it so that everything's basically just quads, so that when I do a bevel, it's going to be a nice and, simple thing. I'm not going to have any problems. And once I finish that up, I'm going to bevel it, add that edge. Now I'm going to go into the UVs, separate the inside, separate the outside, separate the bottom. But instead of cutting this up into 4 separate quadrants like I was doing before, I'm only going to make one slice along one edge. And I'm going to leave these as one long continuous piece. And the idea behind that is now, instead of using triplanar in Substance Painter, where it comes at each of the 6 major angles of a cube, I'm going to let it be in UV mode so it will wrap over nicely from one area to another. I'm only going to end up with one seam. So for this is the Tomato Rain present. So I want to go with reds and greens on this one. So at first it's red on the bottom, green on the top, and I swap it really quick. And then add red tomatoes for the top of it. I'm just trying to make the presents a little bit more easy to identify. Because in the original Toejam, I got to tell you, I never bothered to memorize what anything looks like. So I'd rather have, presents that make sense. So it's not so hard to figure out where you're going. Next present, up again, same old stuff that you saw before. Cutting it up, cleaning up the geometry, putting the lid back on, unwrapping the UVs as usual. Very easy present this time to deal with. It's just a big old box. Nothing special with it. And keeping it all as one solid object. Now I did screw something up. I forgot to grab one of the edges when I did a bevel. So I just manually introduced the geometry to make it a proper bevel. As you can see here, I could have mirrored it over if I wanted to make it, exactly perfect, but this is close enough. No one's ever going to notice the inside of this thing. So it's fine. Now that's all good, export it out, bring it over into Substance Painter, apply our Toejam and Earl Smart material to the object, and then this time around I decided to go with a black and white motif. I think I remember there being a present like that somewhere in it, or at least like a tiger stripe or something. So that's kind of what we go with. Now I did screw up some of the normals. I didn't make them soft enough. So I go back in, re-import it, just to make sure that none of the baking processes was relying on that normal information. It might screw things up. And I just play around. Not 100% happy with how this goes. I also go in there and I back off on the extreme whites and extreme blacks. And I make them more of a very bright gray and a very dark gray, just so that the lighting will have something to play with. Because if you push things to the extremes, to super black or super white, your lighting won't have anything to interact with because it's already maxed out one way or the other. So, dialing back your values a little bit and restricting yourself to a more intermediate range is just going to give the lighting engine more to work with, really. Now I'm going back in. We're going to load in this last present, and I had the idea that I was going to use transparencies on the top and make a nice little bow. But quite frankly, I just said, screw it. I don't feel like doing that. Right now, I'm duplicating the geometry, reversing it so that inside of Unity, I can use the standard fade or transparency or the cutoff shader basically to handle things. And I won't have to go in there and write a custom shader that messes with backface culling and whatnot. But I just decided to abandon it. I just cut the thing off and just say, screw it. I'm just going to make it a standard present. No transparencies for me today. I don't feel like dealing with it in Photoshop. So then we clean it up, export out the UVs, and yeah, that's pretty much it for this object. Once the UVs are handled, we're going to go ahead and set the material up properly and export it back out to Substance Painter, load it up in there, apply our smart material in just a second, and just play with how it's going to look. And that's where this material really shines. This cotton, printed cotton shirt, the amount of customization that it offered me made it so I had to practically do no work. All I have to do is just look at the colors and choose stuff that kind of looks interesting. Here we're going with a light blue and an orange. And I noticed that I screwed everything up on all of them. I left the rim, the color of the top of the box. So I'm going to go through now and open up each one and fix the top rim of each box so that it is the proper material and it's not the top of the box, but the actual bottom of the element instead. What you just saw was me exporting out each asset to Unity so that I can just go and grab the textures once I've finalized these rims, and I can bring it into Unity and check out what everything looks like. Little tedious, but I fix it all, grab all the textures, make a materials and a textures folder. I'm going to go in now and do the long, laborious task of assigning every single texture to each individual material, and which is what you're seeing now. It took me a lot longer than the few seconds you're going to be watching for, that's for sure. But then I lay out each present really fast, and there you have it. We've got all of our presents done inside of Unity, and yeah, I'm relatively happy, except for a few small changes I'm going to make with them. So with that, I don't know what I'm going to jump into next. We'll see you in the next video. I'll see you all then. So long, and goodbye. Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see more, remember to subscribe and hit the bell if you want notifications about new videos I upload. And if you'd like to help even more, consider becoming a patron on my Patreon account. Links, as always, are in the description. See you next time. So long, goodbye.